Okay, back again. So Acts chapter 14, and Paul has just been stoned and then revived in the city of Lystra. They healed a man and preached the gospel there. There were people who believed, and then there was persecution. So they move on, and verse 21 of chapter 14, actually verse 20, it says, "The next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe." So here we have Paul and Barnabas moving on their the first missionary journey. It says, verse 21, "And when they had preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples." Isn't that great? Strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith, and saying, "We must through many tribulations enter the kingdom of God." So when they had appointed elders in every city, or rather when they had appointed elders in every church, and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. And after they had passed through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. Now when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. From there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for the work which they had completed. Now when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. So they stayed there a long time with the disciples. So, interesting passage here. They leave Lystra. They preached the gospel. Actually, they come to Derbe. And when they had preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples, then they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch. So here we just have really a half a verse that tells us about Derbe. And the book of Acts, and really all the New Testament, the narratives, Luke here gives us a snapshot of things that happened in the book of Acts. And there are many other things. Here, just in a half a verse, it says, when they had preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples, they returned. So we don't know how long they stayed in Derbe, but there's a significant work that happens. They preach the gospel, and many disciples are made, not simply converts, but disciples who are able to win others to Christ. And it's interesting. That's just a half a verse, but it's a very significant half a verse. So the second half of verse 21, it says, they returned to Lystra, where Paul got stoned, Iconium, and Antioch. These were all places that they were previously run out of, and they return. And if you think about it, they must have had the peace of God. They might have prayed like, "Lord, here we go. You know what happened when we were here last time, and what's going to go down," and all that. But they go, and they want to have a look, and they want to visit with the converts that they have made. Verse 22, it says, they strengthened the souls of the disciples. And that's what the church needs today. People need to have their souls strengthened. In the Old Testament, it says David strengthened himself in the Lord. And God can use us to strengthen the soul of another believer, maybe someone who is weak in the faith or going through a tough time. He wants to use us to strengthen the souls of the disciples. And so Paul here, it says, exhorting them to continue in the faith and saying, "We must through many tribulations enter the kingdom of God." So Paul says words to them, but he's got the scars to back it up also. And he's well aware that it is through many tribulations we enter the kingdom of God. It doesn't mean that we enter because we endure tribulations. Jesus is the one who gained us entrance through his finished work on the cross. But as we walk the walk that God has before us, it's really what it is. It's been said that we're either heading into a trial, or we're in the midst of a trial, or we're coming out of a trial. And really, that's what the Christian life is. I mean, there are a lot of good times that the Lord gives us and seasons of blessings, but it's a walk of faith, and it's an endurance. And even what we're going through now with the coronavirus, we're all enduring by faith and trusting in the Lord. So Paul here, he says, there's going to be many tribulations as we enter the kingdom of God. And we're just going to go through a lot of stuff in this life, but God is faithful, and there's a peace that surpasses understanding, and there's a joy in the Lord as we walk through that and as we walk through that together. So here, there were converts, something we want to point out, there were converts made and churches planted in Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch of Pisidia. And this seems to be some months later here. And so they're returning and they're seeing how the believers are doing, and they're making sure that they're still continuing in the faith, that the enemy hasn't snatched the seed away. So verse 23, it says, so when they had appointed elders in every church and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. So it's this second loop that they're making their way through some of these cities. They're working their way back, and they're appointing elders. That they're seeing who's still standing strong, who's growing. They're seeing what spiritual gifts are emerging. And 1 Timothy 5:22, it says, do not lay hands on anyone hastily. So with prayer and fasting, what they're doing is they're ordaining these elders and those who are going to be, Paul and Barnabas are carrying on. They're trucking on to the next location, but they're appointing elders and they're laying hands on those who are going to lead these churches in these areas. And they take it very seriously. They do it with prayer and fasting, and then they commit them to the Lord. And they're being committed to the Lord in whom they had believed, and the Lord will keep them. And this thing is going to continue to grow after Paul and Barnabas roll out of town, because the Lord is in it. And one lesson that we can learn here is that any really ministry that we do, it's so important to build the work on the Lord rather than on a human personality, because if it's built on a human personality, then once that person leaves or something happens, then the whole thing falls apart. But if it's built on the foundation of Jesus Christ, then it doesn't matter whoever the person was that started it. If that person has built the thing on Jesus Christ, then that person can step out of the way and someone else can be raised up and whatever, and it doesn't matter because it's God's thing and it's God's work. It's his kingdom. And Paul and Barnabas are laboring for a season, and then they're moving on to the next thing that they're called to, and there's a work behind that remains, hopefully. And that's what we want to see. We want to have fruit that remains because it's been built on Jesus Christ. So verse 24, after they had passed through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. Now when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. And from there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for the work which they had completed. So it's about a year roughly after they had boarded a ship. Actually, it's a year after they had went out on this missionary journey. They board a ship and they head back to their home church in Antioch, and they show their videos from Outreach Week, and they give a presentation to the church, and they share with them all the things that the Lord has done. Verse 27, now when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. So they stayed there a long time with the disciples. So here they are. There's this joyful season of being reunited in Antioch, the church that had sent them out on this mission, and they're sharing all the things that the Lord has done. Here's what he did in Cyprus, and this guy Sergius Paulus, the proconsul, came to faith, and then we went to Pisidia and Antioch and Lystra and Iconium and all these places, and this wonderful work that the Lord did. And it says that they shared all that the Lord had done, and there's this kind of thrusting open. We've seen it in bits and pieces, but the door is really being thrust open to Gentiles, and it's just the gospel is going out to the whole world. And it says that Paul and Barnabas, they stay there a long time with the disciples, so probably a year or two. And they're resting up from their missionary journey. They're teaching and discipling there in the church in Antioch, and they're just enjoying the season that the Lord has for them there. And they're getting ready to go out again shortly, and we'll look at that when we get to chapter 15.